in this video, I want to try to put you in my place. Here's the scenario. I have a Mercedes W123 Turbo that has a soggy transmission and it's jerking between second and third. Now, you know, I could probably live with it, but it isn't very pleasurable to drive, so I'm going to fix the transmission. Now I'm going to pull it out. But I also have a couple of these transmissions sitting back in my shop, so I decided to pull them out today. You might want to buy a used transmission, and if you buy a used transmission, don't just stick it in the car. I warn you, do not just buy a used 722.3 and go with what the seller is saying, oh, it's a great transmission, and put it in the car. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these two transmissions, we're going to do a full inspection. The very first thing you want to start with is the inspection of the pan and the fluid. I should mention, if you're planning to pull the transmission out of your car, go ahead and remove the pan completely after draining and do your inspection before you even pull the transmission. But in the case of these have been pulled out and the pans have not been opened up. So we're going to take each transmission, we're going to pull the pan, we're going to inspect the pan, we're going to inspect the fluid, we're going to inspect the filter, and this will give us the first clue as to the condition of these 722.3s that you see here. The first thing that may surprise you with both of these pans is the amount of fluid still in them when I've removed the drain plugs and drained them thoroughly. So just be forewarned, just because you drain the pan doesn't mean you get all the fluid out. Be real careful when you drop the pans. Now I should mention both of these transmissions have been sitting around for a long time. Don't be surprised at what we're going to see in both of these pans. Let's start out with this W126 transmission. Notice the fluid is a little bit darker. Now the history on this transmission is, you know, it's probably sat around for 10 years and only driven just recently before I pulled it. And it shifted okay. Now look here. All right. Okay, we do have that silver material from the clutches, so this is not a brand new transmission. I don't see any metallic particles. We just see the normal wear from the clutches. Here's the pan off the 123. This came off a 300 TD wagon that had been sitting in a field for about 8 years. The guy claimed he rebuilt the engine, rebuilt the transmission, then he just lost interest, had a problem, and let it sit. So this is a classic example of what happens. You say, oh no, I got coolant. No, if you got coolant in here, this would be foamed up and the color would be quite a bit different. But this is a classic example of condensation from a transmission that has sat a long time. Once the lesson here is, hey, you pick up an old Benz, you pick up a used transmission, you take the pan off and you change the fluid first thing. You're looking at the valve body of the 123 transmission. I pull the filter, and if you look at the filter, it doesn't look too bad. You're looking for a lot of sediment here. If there's a lot of sediment on the back side of the filter from clutch wear, that means the fluid and filter haven't been changed in a long time. So that looks pretty good. I'm not seeing anything else here. I don't see a lot of buildup of sludge anywhere around these. Now I can tell you right away there's some evidence that this transmission has been opened up. Look right here. The use of RTV sealant, which I absolutely abhor, and you should never use this on a transmission. But this rear case has been taken off, so we know at some point this transmission's been opened up, but it's going to take more inspection before we know the true condition. This is the valve body on the transmission out of the W126 300SD. Now, I remember I drove this car and the transmission shifted very well. There's something about this transmission I think you'll find interesting. See that number there? That's not original. That's not factory original. Look at the filter. The filter is genuine Mercedes right there. The filter on the other one was aftermarket. This is not a new transmission. I was told that this was a factory replacement about 12 years ago, and I estimate the car maybe had 40,000 miles on it. Let me show you how I know for sure that this is a factory remap. This will surprise some of you, but look at this tag here. Those tags were not put on at the factory with the new cars. These tags were put on when the factory rebuilt the 722.3 transmission. So what's the next step? Obviously, we're going to have to dig into these transmissions a little further. So what we're going to do next is we're going to clean up those pans, and we're just going to put them back on. This is going to keep this area clean, and we'll be able to move the transmission up and down with the pans back on the bottom of these transmission cases. And then we'll move on to some further internal inspection. I cleaned the pans for both of the transmissions and put them back on with the seals, left the filters off. Just want to warn you, you want to minimize exposure to any dirt until you actually determine what you're going to do with the transmission. Because getting a bunch of junk in here, even if you think, oh, I'm going to clean it later, it's a big hassle to do all the thorough cleaning inside one of these transmissions. Now, the second thing after the transmission fluid and filter is you want to check the B2 piston right here and right here. Now, why the B2? It's becoming obvious that the B2 piston can give you a big indication on two things. One, age of the transmission. Two, the amount of mileage and wear. Now, they made a couple of revisions over the years, so if you have the latest revision on the B2, that means the transmission was rebuilt not so long ago. So I'm going to open up this one first. This is the transmission out of the W123. These are pretty easy to remove and inspect. Just have to get this snap ring out of there. And then this comes out, and we're going to pull out the piston. Huh, look at that. That's the early version with just the single sealing ring like a piston ring. And if I look inside here, it has the aluminum bushing. So this has not received any revisions on the B2. We always just check and see if it's binding. Now, it does feel like it's binding right in there a little bit. It could be this part binding on the aluminum bushing. That's why in the later revisions they went to nylon bushings inside here. So let's take a look at the other transmission. Okay, it's like opening up a Christmas present. Oh, look. Before I even pull it out, let's test it, okay? Look at that. All the way in, all the way out. No binding. And I know already that this is the upgraded B2. Look at the lack of scoring on the shaft. And surprise, look in there. This one has the nylon bushing insert, meaning when they rebuilt this, they put in all the latest revisions. You're looking at the front of the remanufactured W126 turbo diesel transmission. I'm just looking at a couple things in here, particularly right in here and right in here. If this seal or if this O-ring were leaking, this would be real damp. This is probably from the engine, so we won't worry about that. But this is the area I'm looking at. If you see any wetness, now remember, this hasn't been cleaned. You see any wetness right here, or you see any wetness coming down right here, that means the seal and this big O-ring in here are going to need to be replaced. But this looks pretty good. I also like the amount of shaft end play. There should be a little bit of movement here, but not too much. And this transmission is starting to look real good to me, but if I'm going to put it into a W123, I'm going to have to replace this whole rear case. And the reason is the W126 300SD used an electronic speedometer, and the W123 used a cable drive. So if I take the other transmission, take this off and swap it, I'll be able to put this W126 300SD into a W123 300D. Now look at the tag. The tag confirms the part number of replacement. So at this point, the plan for this transmission is to just do some minimal outside resealing. I'm going to change this O-ring. I'm going to change this O-ring. I'm going to change the 2 shaft O-rings. I'm going to change the O-ring and the vacuum modulator. And we'll check a couple things. Obviously, I need a new shift bushing there. But I'm feeling really good about this transmission and just doing some resealing work and putting it in the car. Now, I know somebody's going to say, but Kent, you've got it out. Why don't you rebuild it? Well, rebuilding one of these is very time-consuming. And this is going into a collector car that I doubt whether I'll drive more than 5,000 miles in the next 10 years. Now, this transmission is a different story. Looking at this right here, we're getting ready to pull this case off. And when I see RTV, my first reaction, maybe it's been overhauled, but maybe it's less than a professional overhaul. There's another indication I don't like here, and that this could have been assembled improperly, is right up front here. Look at this. This is very tight, and there's hardly any play here at all. Now, this could have been put together and not shimmed properly. We're going to have to do some more investigation here, but I think this transmission will need to be opened up. Now, the extent of the overhaul will be determined once you open it up, and we're going to do that. We're going to take and pull this back cover off because we need it anyway for the other transmission. We're going to pull the front pump off because the next thing you want to check are the reverse clutches. They'll give you an idea how much wear is inside. Almost always you'll find the reverse clutches will wear out faster than the K1 or the K2. This is stuck on there, I think, with that RTV. It's going to take a little persuasion. There we go. Now you're going to get to see here why I detest RTV. I know some of you are thinking, what? It's great stuff, Ken. There we go. Look at this. This is why I don't like RTV. I call it worms. The worms of despair will leave these edges. RTV deteriorates in gas and oil, and this gets down in the transmission. Can you imagine some of this stuff getting into the valve body? Now, the reason he used RTV, he couldn't find a gasket. This is supposed to have a gasket. What kind of a professional would do that? Here's a quick tip I want to share. You're taking these transmissions apart, you're going to run into these shims, and you want to keep track of them. And I found the best way is keep the pieces together and use a zip tie until you're ready to clean and reassemble these parts. That's going to keep this from getting misplaced. To inspect the reverse clutch plates, you're going to have to pull out this front pump assembly. We just removed all these bolts. There's a couple of threaded holes here in this casting, and you can use these to help you remove the pump assembly. Sometimes you'll need a little slide hammer to help, but let's see, just wiggle this one. Okay, it's coming out. So we're going to just take this out, lift it out carefully. Okay, let's set that right there, upside down. The next step is to remove the B1 piston assembly. This is a special tool I've developed. We're going to run it in a little bit so we can get that clip out. Okay. I'm going to pull the piston assembly out, and then we have to pull the plastic piece out. Next, we're going to have to remove the B1 thrust body here. This is a number 12 millimeter hex. This also houses a pin that will catch on those brake bands if you don't remove this. Oh, boy. Okay. Wow, that's really in there. We'll bring out the big guns here. Unbelievable. I could do a whole video on these type of big wrench dances, and the reason I call it a big wrench dance is you got to bring out the big wrenches. I'm going to show you a couple things here. You know, I could get a long breaker bar, but the problem is I can't hold the transmission. So the long breaker bar with a big pipe is not going to work very well. You saw this big impact. I'm going to try to shock the threads, and then we'll try the impact again. The idea here is to hit straight on, not to the side, but straight on. We want to try to shock the threads inward. Okay, now we'll try the impact again. Ha-ha! Look at that little trick. Look at how that came out just by shocking the threads with a big hammer. There it is. Look at that little baby. You see why you need to get that removed? If you try to yank the core of the transmission out, you'll get this to pop out. And it's better to pull this out before you separate the center core from the case. And look at that. There's some more O-rings. There's O-rings everywhere. I think I could write a song, O-rings everywhere. The next step is to take these special pliers I've developed and pull this very strong clip off the shaft, just like that. Try to get this off with the screwdriver. It'll drive you nuts. So the next step is reach in there and pull out this B1 brake band. We're going to take a close look at this right away. Okay, it doesn't look too bad. It's still showing some of the numbers, which means it doesn't have excessive wear, and I'm not seeing heat discoloration, so the B1 brake band doesn't look too bad. Okay, I think we're ready. We can get this center core out. Wiggle, 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 wiggle. Oh, here it comes. And it's heavy, so get your other hand in here and support it like this. Oh, maybe this is heavy. Now I can lift the K1 assembly off. Just kind of looking at gears there. Let's check the play. Notice, keep track of those needle bearings. But this is a quick check. Oh, look at how much play there is. So that doesn't look too good. That shows me those clutches are probably worn. Now let's take a close look at these reverse clutches. These are the things I like to look at to determine the age of the transmission. Okay, let's see what we got here. There's our ring. Okay, that doesn't look too bad. No burn marks. We got some scoring going on there, but I've seen these where you got metal on metal. And it's usually the rear one that'll wear the most. So we could do some miking on this to see whether or not it falls within spec, but these don't look too bad. I'm going to remove this K2 clutch assembly because I want to inspect the B2 brake band, because that's another item that wears a lot in these transmissions. So the first thing I do is I look here to see if I got any burn marks and scoring. When we talk about tossing a transmission away that's not rebuildable, I had one recently and this was seized to the shaft. Okay, there is some scoring there, I can feel it. Okay, we'll flip this over and quickly check the clearances on the clutch plates. That doesn't feel too bad. In order to get this out, I'm going to have to remove the pan in the intermediate plate. So I'm just going to leave that in there. I'm going to get a mirror and look down in there and see if I can determine how much wear is on this B2 brake band. I think this is a pretty good example of how far you're going to have to go into these 7.2 2.3 transmissions to determine the extent of the wear. Now on that rebuilt transmission over there, you know, I'm pretty confident I really don't need to open it up, but this is a different matter here. I'm seeing some things in this transmission that just scream we need to do a complete overhaul. The first is the scoring on this K2 drum assembly, which means that the B2 brake band needs to be replaced, and that's going to require, you know, some further disassembly. I'm looking at potential, we can measure this, but I can tell already that's probably a little bit too much play. You probably don't want to put this back together unless you replace these clutch packs, and we're going to have to open this up further, as well as the front pump over here, to determine if we have any excessive wear there. But right now, in my humble opinion, this transmission here requires an overhaul.